concluded. We move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I give the call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. Can the Minister advise the House whether any of the 81 hardcore criminals released into the community following the High Court's decision last week were released into the community without a visa?
The call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. I can confirm that all of those individuals required to be released as a result of the decision of the High Court are on bridging visas with appropriate conditions.
Call to the Honourable Member for Chisholm.
Thanks so much, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How have the government's actions to relieve cost of living pressures helped Australians doing it tough, and what opposition has the government faced in delivering this to help to people?
Order. There's far too much noise during that question. The Prime Minister has the call.
I thank the member for her question very much, and of course relieving costs of living pressures is our #1 priority. And we know those outside there.
Order.
I
Members
take
on my
the
left.
objection from the Shadow Treasurer,
Order.
who can't ask a question of the Treasurer, even though he's back today. He's back. Get ready, Jim. The fact is that the figures released
Deakin will
today
cease ejecting.
show that wages rose by 1.3% in the September quarter, higher than the inflation rate. Real wages rose in the quarter. They rose. They went up.
Order.
1.3 is higher than 1.2.
There you go, Angus.
Pretty simple.
There you go, mate.
Pretty simple. Pretty simple.
The member
The
for
highest quarterly
Hume
growth
and the member for
on
the Treasurer will
record.
cease ejecting.
Now, those opposite said, of course, people will recall that lifting the minimum wage would wreck the economy.
That's right.
But they had more to say than that, Mr Speaker, because when they were voting against the Secure Jobs Better Pay laws,
Fairfax.
their spokesperson on workplace relations, Senator Cash, said this: "It would return Australia to the dark ages. It would close down the economy. It would leave supermarket shelves bare. There would be nothing there." The fact is that they voted against this legislation. They opposed the increase in the minimum wage, and we are getting real wages lifting. Real wages lifting. But just like they opposed all the other measures, cheaper medicines, $200 million on 17 million scripts, they voted against it 6 times in the Senate. And we know that the Leader of the Opposition wanted no one to be able to see a doctor for free and wanted to jack up the price of medicines by $5 a script. Fee-free TAFE. The Deputy Leader said that this was a waste of taxpayer dollars. Well, there's 214,000 Australians have benefited already from fee-free TAFE. Energy bill relief. The member for New England claimed that this was Venezuelan communism, was what he said. The Housing Australia Future Fund, they oppose that as well. They oppose the biggest investment ever in bulk billing, even though now the AMA Vice President Danielle McMullen has said in Townsville she's going back to bulk billing as a direct result of our policy.
Concluded. The call to the Honourable, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs. Can the Minister advise the House whether any of the 81 hardcore criminals released into the community following the High Court's decision last week were released into the community without a visa?
The question is in order. I'll give the call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you, Speaker. And again, I thank the Leader of the Opposition for the question. I should confirm that there have now been 83 releases from detention, and all of those who have been released from detention have been granted and are on visas with appropriate conditions. And I say again that complying with the orders of the High Court is not something that is optional.
The call to the honourable order. The member for Paterson is warned. Give the call to the member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government helping ease the cost of living pressures and get wages moving again, and what other approaches have been rejected?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Mr Speaker, the member for Holt is a champion for working people in her community and her country, and she would have watched with great interest today the release of the new wages data, which came out just a short time ago. What we saw earlier this morning was that the wage price index rose 1.3% in the September quarter this year and 4.0% for the year. This means, as the Prime Minister said, that real wages have grown now for the second consecutive quarter. This was the highest quarterly growth in the 26-year history of the wage price index, and it is the fastest annual growth in wages since 2009, Mr Speaker. Now, the Shadow Treasurer keeps interjecting, Mr Speaker. I mean, he doesn't get a question, and so he hopes that if he chirps enough that will be a substitute for a question. But I heard him earlier today, before question time. He's out there in the courtyard and he's talking about real wages, Mr Speaker. And it hasn't dawned on the Shadow Treasurer that real wages were falling 3.4% in the last quarter that they were in office. 3.4%, Mr Speaker. Now, they are now 1.4% in annual terms, which is still too much of a real wages fall, but we are closing the gap that we inherited from those opposite. 3.4% real wages fall under them, 1.4% in the numbers today, but the second consecutive quarter of real wages growth on our watch, Mr Speaker. Now, this isn't accidental. This isn't accidental. Wages growth is a deliberate design feature of our economic plan. That's why we supported an increase to the minimum wage. It's why we supported decent pay for aged care workers, and that was recognised in today's release, Mr Speaker. Now, those opposite spent the best part of a decade pursuing a policy of deliberate wage stagnation and deliberate wage suppression.
The Treasurer will resume his seat. Order. The Treasurer will just pause. I want to hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
Well, Mr Speaker, on relevance, the question was—
the Treasurer will not interject while I'm hearing the point of order.
What is the government doing to get wages moving, and what approaches have been rejected? That is not licence to spend the entirety of his answer going over
the Treasurer have not called the Treasurer. Resume your seat. The Manager of Opposition is entitled to raise his point of order in silence.
The Treasurer is a repeat offender, and he should be directed to speak about the policies of his own government.
The member for Wright will not use that language. The Leader of the House.
Mr Speaker, the point of order raised by the Manager of Opposition Business actually explained why this answer is in order. When the question refers to what policies have been rejected, then to refer to the opposition's policies to keep wages down, to keep them low, as something that we have rejected is exactly what the question is asking the minister to respond to.
I want to deal with this. The Treasurer has been going for 2 minutes. Part of the question did say what measures have been rejected. I'm going to ask him to return to the question to make sure he's talking about policy, not personality. I give him the call.
Thank you, Speaker. We reject the deliberate wage stagnation and wage suppression which defined a decade of economic mismanagement from those opposite. And that's because on this side of the House we see decent wages growth as part of the solution to cost of living pressures, not part of the problem, which is what those opposite think. Now, Mr Speaker, the sorts of rubbish that we hear about wages from those opposite, and particularly the Shadow Treasurer, might get him a polite little golfer's clap over a sherry at that Cookers convention he went to in London, or at the H.R. Nichols Society on Friday, He's at the HR Nichols Society on Friday, Mr Speaker,
Order.
but we take a completely different approach to those opposite. Getting wages moving again is a key part of our economic plan, and we are pleased to see today for the second consecutive quarter that real wages are growing again.
Order. Just going to ask the Treasurer to temper his language in future. Order. Before I call the member for Brisbane, I have a few acknowledgements and welcomes that I'd like to do for the House. The Treasurer and the member for O'Connor, when I'm welcoming people to the House, show some courtesy. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is a trade delegation from the United States led by the Governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, and a delegation from the Brazil Federation Council led by the Secretary of the Council of the Federation, Presidency of the Republic of Brazil, Mrs. Elaine Licio, and representatives from the 2023 Armenian National Committee of Australia Youth Advocates, guests of the Manager of Opposition Business. On behalf of the House, welcome to you all. Give the call to the honourable member for Brisbane.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. Most high school students can't vote, yet the decision of your government to push more coal and gas is harming their future. That is a big reason why this Friday students will hold a school strike for climate, gathering in their thousands in cities and towns across the country. Minister, do you support the students being able to strike this Friday and to leave school to protest for climate action and against more coal and gas?
Order. Members on my left will not interject while questions are being asked. Give a call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for his question. My view is, I hope pretty uncontroversial, that school students should be at school during school hours. And, you know, I want our kids to be passionate. I want our kids to care about democracy, and I want our kids to care about the future, but I also want our kids at school.
Give the call. Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Bean.
Speaker, my question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. Following today's release of the Australian Signals Directorate's annual cyber threat report for 2022-23, what action is the Albanese Labor government taking to meet these threats, and why is this required after a wasted decade in defence?
Call to the Minister for Defence and the Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, I thank the member for his question. And today, the Australian Signals Directorate released its annual cyber threat report, and what it shows is that there is a worsening cyber threat for our country. We're seeing an increase in cyber crime. We're also seeing an increase in the interest of state actors in our critical infrastructure, including our defence, and that includes an increase in the interest in our work on acquiring a nuclear-powered submarine capability under the banner of AUKUS. And what this requires is an improvement in our defence, in our cyber defence capability, which is what we are doing through the Australian Signals Directorate. But this task has been made so much harder by the mess that has been left to us by the Leader of the Opposition. When the Leader of the Opposition announced an increase in our cyber capability in March of last year, there was an $8 billion hole. Big announcement without the money to back it up, just as there was an announcement for $35 billion for guided weapons, but only $1 billion was allocated. Big on the fanfare, light on the substance, because those opposite weren't doing defence policy, they were just running an advertising agency, which is what they literally did on the 4th of January in 2020, when at the height of the worst bushfires in our country's history, they used the Australian Defence Force to cut an ad to raise money for the Liberal Party. Now, this government is making the difficult decisions to prioritise defence spending on where it's needed the most, and that definitely includes our cyber capacity. But we also understand that what that also requires is an increase in our spending on defence, and that actually stands in stark contrast to those opposite. Back in May of this year, the Shadow Treasurer said, and I quote, "The defence budget should be within the envelope that's already been established. That was the shadow minister. That was the shadow treasurer. And last week, the shadow minister for Defence backed that in when he said, "I can't commit to increased spending." When it comes to those opposite, and it comes to defence, you'll get hoopla, you will get singing and you will get dancing, but you will not get an extra dollar for defence. Well, this government is taking defence spending to 2.3% of GDP over the next 10 years. And that is a 10% increase in the spending trajectory on defence that we inherited from those opposite, because we are committed to making the difficult decisions to keep Australians safe.
Give the call to the honourable member for Wannon.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration. The ABC has just reported that following the High Court decision, the government released some of the 80 hardened criminals, which include murderers, rapists and child sex offenders, into the community without a visa. Is this true?
Order. Members on my left do not need to add side effects, sound effects as well. Order. Anyway, the House will come to order. Give the call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and I thank the Shadow Minister for his question. And I say again, complying with the orders of the High Court is not optional. It is incumbent on this government and on any government. All those who have been required by the decision of the court to be released have been placed on appropriate visas with appropriate conditions, and as I've outlined at some length in the chamber, there has been quite an extensive process of engagement with relevant law enforcement authorities.
Order. The member for Latrobe. When the House comes to order, I'll hear from the member for Pearce.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. How is the Albanese Labour government getting on with the job of delivering critical transport infrastructure, including in my electorate, while also doing the responsible work of cleaning up the mess left behind by the Liberals and Nationals? Thank you.
No, order. The minister will pause and just resume his seat. There is far too much noise during questions. I want to make this clear. I've got to hear the questions and they've got to be heard in silence. What comes after is up to the House. But for the purpose of question time, questions have to be heard in silence, without commentary, any effects at all. So I'm just going to ask the member for Pearce to state a question again so I can hear the entire question.
My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport and Regional Development. How is the Albanese Labour government getting on with the job of delivering critical transport infrastructure, including in my electorate, while also doing the responsible work of cleaning up the mess left behind by the Liberals and Nationals? Thank you.
Give the call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
I thank the member for Pearce for her question and, of course, for her continued advocacy for infrastructure in her electorate, including projects like Metronet, the Yancheep Rail extension and, of course, the Mitchell Freeway. As members know, this government has been doing the hard work of cleaning up the mess that those opposite left. We'll soon be announcing our response to the Independent Infrastructure Review, which has already highlighted just how reckless the coalition has been when it came to managing or not managing our infrastructure investment pipeline. Their legacy and the path that they set for this nation is $33 billion of known cost blowouts and an inability to add any new infrastructure projects to the pipeline until the year 2033. It is a breathtaking indictment on every single one of those opposite, but particularly those in the National Party. It's an indictment on their economic management and their failure to genuinely deliver for their communities. While we've been doing the hard work of responding to the recommendations of the review, negotiating with the states and territories, we've of course also been getting on with the job of construction. We've completed the following projects: the Mitchell Freeway extension to Hester Avenue in the member for Pearce's electorate, the Townsville Ring Road Stage 5 extension opened, Bruce Highway, Bribie Island to Steve Irwin Way in Caboolture, and we've completed that. The Barwon Head Roads upgrade stage 1.
The Minister will pause. The Minister will pause. The member for Hume is warned. If I'm pausing a minister, it's because there's too much noise in the House. There is way too much noise. This will not continue. The minister is going to be heard in silence. It was the same yesterday when this minister is on her feet. She deserves the respect to be heard in silence. Give her the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Barwon Heads Road upgrade stage 1, which I've opened. We've commenced projects like the Huon Link Road in Tasmania, the Tanami in Western Australia, the next stage of the Jarvis Bay Road intersection upgrade, the new Midland station at Metronet in WA, and, of course, announced first by this Prime Minister when he was Infrastructure Minister, the Rockhampton Ring Road, which the Coalition not only failed to start any work on, you actually didn't provide enough money to do it. You did not provide enough money to do it, a project being delivered by the Albanese Labor government.
Members on my
left.
left.
We reached a major milestone on our election commitment to transition Perth's buses to electric. We're nearing completion on the Nowra Bridge project in New South Wales, with all lanes now open to traffic. The Barton Highway upgrade, we remember that. That's now got vehicles travelling on it for the first time in the final alignment. We awarded the design and construct contract to the Monaro Highway. We're opening the Menini Overpass in part of the Cairns Southern Access Road. We're getting on with the Majors Road interchange in South Australia. The Bridgewater Bridge is well under construction, and we're nearing completion of the Townsville Northern Access interchange. While we saw the Liberals and Nationals all about announcement, we're getting on with the job of actually delivering.
The member for Gippsland is seeking the call on a point of order.
Mr Speaker, seeking leave to table the full list of documents the minister has actually started projects and completed in her time as minister.
Resume your seat. Order. When the House comes to order, members on my left cease interjecting. I'll give the call to the member for Wannon, but the House will have to come to order first. The member, the Treasurer, will cease interjecting. Give the call to the member for Wannon.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration. How many hardcore criminals released from detention got a letter from the Department of Home Affairs that said they were being released as an unlawful non-citizen?
Call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thank you, Speaker. And once again, I thank the Shadow Minister for asking a question of me. It's a pretty similar one, and the answer will be similar. I say again that complying with the orders of the court is not optional. We have to give effect to the decision that was made, and all of the 83 releases required by the decision of the court are people who are on bridging visas with appropriate conditions.
Give the call to the honourable member for Blair.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How are Medicare urgent care clinics helping Australians get urgent health care when they need it and helping ease pressure on hospital emergency departments? Why is this important after a decade of cuts and neglect?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for Blair for his question. He's such a strong advocate for better health care, better aged care in his Ipswich community, and a really strong supporter of the Ipswich Medicare Urgent Care Clinic that's been open for weeks now. There are now 38 clinics open and operating, with 58 to be open by the end of this year, Mr Speaker. They'll be operating 7 days a week, extended hours, open to walk-in patients who need urgent care for non-life-threatening emergencies, either for themselves or for their kids, Mr Speaker, like Billy and his mum, who went straight to the Ipswich clinic with a suspected broken wrist from playing basketball. 12-year-old Billy was triaged in just 5 minutes, Mr Speaker. He was seen shortly after by a doctor. He was then x-rayed, he was treated with a splint, and he was then connected for a physio appointment the following week, all done within 2 hours, Mr Speaker. Or Melissa in the member for Lindsay's electorate, who took her daughter to the Penrith Urgent Care Clinic with a possible ankle fracture from playing soccer. She was seen, X-rayed and discharged with a cam boot in less than 1 hour, Mr Speaker. Melissa's mum said, and I quote, "Why would anyone go to the emergency department with this sort of injury when the Medicare Urgent Care Clinic can deal with it so quickly?" Mr Speaker, it's not just quickly. Importantly, these appointments are completely free of charge. They are fully bulk billed. All you need to do is take your Medicare card. So far, with the 60,000 occasions of service that have already been delivered, a third of them are for kids under the age of 15. A third of them are on the weekend, when often people can't get in to see their usual GP. And of the weekday services, fully 1 in 5 are after 6 p.m. And these are not just providing high-quality urgent care where and when people need it, completely free of charge. As the member for Blair said, it's also taking much-needed pressure off our overcrowded emergency department. As we know, Mr Speaker, almost half of presentations every year to our EDs are semi- or non-urgent presentations, so-called Category 4 or 5s. It's early days, Mr Speaker, but we know these clinics are already making a difference. The Logan Hospital in the Treasurer's electorate, Category 4 and 5 presentations have gone down by 10% since the Logan Medicare Urgent Care Clinic was open, compared to the July and August average. At the Ipswich Hospital, it's fully a 20% reduction in that type of presentation, a huge relief of pressure. This government was elected, Mr Speaker, to strengthen Medicare. We're delivering on that promise, tripling the bulk billing incentive, delivering cheaper medicines and rolling out a network of Medicare urgent care clinics.
The call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I seek leave to move the following motion.
Order. Members on my right will not interject. The Leader of the Opposition has the call and will be heard in silence.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The House, 1, expresses its grave concern at the vicious rise of anti-Semitic vilification in our country and the breakdown in social cohesion occurring in our communities. 2, expresses its grave concern that social disharmony has reached dangerous levels and that community safety is now at significant risk. 3, condemns the Prime Minister's failure to show the strong leadership required to overcome divisions within his own caucus to stamp out anti-Semitism and bring our country together.
Order.
4, expresses its concerns that community safety in the country has been further threatened by the release of more than 80 hardcore criminals from immigration detention into the Australian community.
Order. The Attorney General
expresses its deep concern that this cohort includes individuals who have been convicted of acts of child rape, of murder, sexual assault and other violent crimes. 6, condemns the government for catastrophically and demonstrably failing to prepare contingencies for High Court proceedings where it was fully aware of the risks. And 7, condemns the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs for consequently undertaking an unprecedented and shocking mass release of dangerous criminal non-citizens into the Australian community, and therefore calls on the Prime Minister to, 1, understand that his priority must be the protection of the Australian community at home, cancel his plans to travel to the United States. 3, urgently convene a national cabinet meeting to formulate a strong and coherent response to combat the rise of anti-Semitism, repair social cohesion and protect community safety. 4, urgently bring forward any legislation necessary to neutralise the threat posed by the hardcore criminals his government has released into the Australian community. And 5, amend the days and hours of sitting to facilitate the passage of such legislation prior to the rise of Parliament this week.
Is the Attorney General will cease interjecting. Is leave granted?
Mr Speaker, as I understand it, the Leader of the Opposition is asking for leave to move a question relating to the serious issue of a rise of anti-Semitism, somehow linking that to a decision of the High Court that was made last week, linking those issues.
Order. The Prime Minister is seeking clarification.
I do not have a copy of the motion,
Order.
Mr.
Well,
Speaker.
the first thing we'll do, Prime Minister, is you can complete your point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I was seeking clarification of the Leader of the Opposition for trying to mix the issue of social cohesion, anti-Semitism and the decision of the High Court relating to...
Just pause a moment, the Leader of the Opposition. The Prime Minister can come to his point of order. I can then ask whether the leave is granted, but I need to know what he's asking at the moment.
I am seeking clarification here. I do not have a copy of the resolution. I would find it extraordinary if this Leader of the Opposition was overreaching so much that he is linking anti-Semitism with the decision of the High Court.
Resume your seat. Thank you, Prime Minister. Is leave granted? We'll just go through this. Is there a copy of the order? To assist the House, if a copy can be provided to the... Yeah.
If I have the call, I'm happy to answer.
The member for Bruce. Order. Order. The way this will work, the Leader of the Opposition is seeking leave to suspend standing orders, seeking leave to move the motion. If the copy could be provided to the Leader of the House, the decision can be made on that question.
Well, Mr. Speaker, to assist you and to assist the House, I'm happy to provide a copy of the motion, but I'd appreciate from you an understanding of the precedent for such an act to take place. I have read out, word for word, the motion that I've put before the House. The practice of this House, long-standing, practiced by the Prime Minister when he was the Leader of the Opposition and a minister in opposition, a shadow minister in opposition. The standard practice under the standing orders is that I can move a motion, which is what I've done. I have read verbatim what it is I'm proposing by way of this motion. The motion is seconded. The standing orders provide for you, Mr. Speaker, as you're well aware, to ask whether leave is granted. And now, that's the question before the House. And that is the question the Prime Minister refuses to answer. He's got the guts to have the conversation or not. The Leader of the Opposition will resume his seat. We'll just do this in a methodical way. On the point of order, the copy has now been presented. I'm just to the Leader of the House on the point of order, the Prime Minister, and then we'll move through the normal processes.
On the point of order, Mr. Speaker, it is actually the practical practice of the House that if a motion such as this, a simple motion, can be read out by leave, and if there is, though, any genuine attempt by an opposition to have a government accept a leave motion, it is given to the government and then negotiated through how many speakers aside. So on that basis, leave is certainly not granted for a motion that links anti-Semitism with the decision of the High Court.
Leave is not granted. The Leader of the Opposition has the call.
I'll wait for the. I've given the copy to the clerk for a photocopy for the Prime Minister. So to the point of order, though, Mr. Speaker, there is no link. To be very clear, there is no link between the rise of anti-Semitism and the High Court case. Now, let me be very clear about that. And this concocted outrage by the Prime Minister demonstrates his weak leadership and his inability to debate a reasonable motion in this parliament.
Members on my right. Order. The members on my right will cease interjecting. The member for Hasluck is warned. Leave has not been granted. There was far too much noise for anyone to hear anything. Copies of the motion have been circulated. I'm now granting the Leader of the Opposition the call to move as he sees fit.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I move that so much of the standing orders be suspended as would prevent the Leader of the Opposition from moving the following motion. The House, 1, expresses its grave concern at the vicious rise of anti-Semitic vilification in our country and the breakdown in social cohesion occurring in our communities. 2, expresses its grave concern that social disharmony has reached dangerous levels and that community safety is now at significant risk. 3, condemns the Prime Minister's failure to show the strong leadership required to overcome divisions within his own caucus, to stamp out anti-Semitism and bring our country together.
Order. Members on my
4,
right.
expresses its concern that community safety in this country has been further threatened by the release of more than 80 hardcore criminals from immigration detention into the Australian community. 5, expresses its deep concern that this cohort includes individuals who have committed acts of child rape, murder, sexual assault and other violent crimes. 6, condemns the government for catastrophically and demonstrably failing to prepare contingencies for High Court proceedings where it was fully aware of the risks. 7, and condemns the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs for then undertaking an unprecedented and shocking mass release of dangerous criminal non-citizens into the Australian community. Mr Speaker, the reality is that this Prime Minister has been missing in action when the Australian people need him most. The Australian Prime Minister has one of the most serious charges in this country. That is to take care of the Australian people, to protect, to defend them, to make sure that where threats exist, the Prime Minister utilises the powers at his disposal to deal with that threat, to neutralise it and to keep our country and our people safe. And he fails at the first hurdle. He fails at the first hurdle. The dreadful attacks that we saw on October 7 in Israel resulted in a listed terrorist organisation here in our country and in other countries in the West and other parts of the developed world, saw Hamas go in and massacre people of Jewish faith. It was a disgraceful act and rightly condemned by both sides of politics. It has given rise to a discussion here in this country, in the United States, elsewhere in the world, and it has seen a significant rise in anti-Semitic behaviour. And I commend those members, one of them that I can identify on the opposite side, for having the guts to stand up and to speak strongly in favour of the Jewish community against those who perform provocative acts, calling Jews names that shouldn't be repeated anywhere, but F the Jews and gas the Jews. And this Prime Minister had a solemn duty, Mr Speaker, to stand up and to make sure that his government spoke with one voice. But did they do that? No. And what the Australian public has seen and what has shocked the Jewish community in recent weeks since the 7th of October is that this government is speaking out of both sides of its mouth. Let's call it out for what it is. You've got Senator Wong in the other place, the foreign minister of this country, who is at odds with her Prime Minister. The caucus is split right down the middle, and the Australian public sees that this is a government where the wheels are quickly falling off. It's given rise to social disharmony in this country. There are Jewish kids who are afraid to go to school. We've got groups, Mr Speaker, who are going into predominantly Jewish communities in our country to try and provoke them into a response. And this Prime Minister is flying off overseas again when he should be staying in this country to deal with the issue. What could he do, he says? What could he possibly do about it? Well, Prime Minister, I've written to you, and what you should do is consult with the Premiers and the Chief Ministers and immediately convene a meeting of the National Cabinet to get a better understanding of the police response, to understand what the security and intelligence agencies are providing, to collate that information and to have a coherent response which provides support and an underpinning to security for people of Jewish faith in this country when they need it most. In their hour of need, this Prime Minister has gone missing. I never thought that I would see in my lifetime a repeat of the horrific scenes that we saw and that we've read about during the course of the Second World War repeated in our lifetimes, but to see people of Jewish faith cowering in their homes, being dragged from cupboards out into the street, when children are still abducted and still held hostage. This Prime Minister needs to stand up and to be united with the Jewish community, and he's not. The words have been qualified, the message divided, and the Australian public has looked to the Prime Minister and not identified this man compared to the man that they voted for in May of 22, less than 18 months ago. Now, what compounds it, Mr Speaker, is the fact that in the last 48 hours we learned that the hapless Minister for Immigration has taken a decision to release 83 hardened criminals, rapists, pedophiles, murderers, the rest of the detail he won't disclose, release those 83 people to live at large in the community with the Australian public, and he's done nothing about it, Mr Speaker. The government knew that this case was being decided in the High Court. They have the benefit of the advice of the first law officer of this country, the Solicitor General and countless KCs at their disposal. The High Court had given indications in relation to this matter. A competent minister would have dealt with this matter by way of legislation at the first available opportunity, and he would have rushed that legislation through this parliament so as to prevent the 83 from going out into the community with the significant potential of committing more offences against the Australian public. One charge, as I say, for this Prime Minister, one primary charge: to keep the Australian public safe, to keep them safe. There is legislation now being drafted. We saw in a train wreck interview by the Defence Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister this morning, that there is legislation being drafted to address this issue. We hear from Senator Wong in the Senate today that there will be legislation introduced into the parliament. So we know now that when the government's been called out and they're under pressure, there actually is a legislative response available. We now know that. Why is it available now, but it wasn't available before the 83 were released into the community? The minister refuses to answer that question. It turns out that this minister has released these dangerous criminals into the community without a visa. Some of those have been left out, and you saw his evasive, tricky and incompetent responses today. Did the Prime Minister pull him into line? Not a chance, Mr Speaker. Not a chance, because this Prime Minister is as weak as water, and the Australian public are working out what a fake and a fraud he and his government have turned out to be. Now, the Australian public at the moment know that they have got a government who has made every situation in their lives more difficult. We know that the cost of living pressures are putting enormous pressure on families because the government has made incompetent decisions in 2 budgets. We now know that in many parts of the country, Australians are suffering because of a crime crisis in their communities. We know that. How does this Prime Minister respond? He goes off overseas again. Prime Minister, don't leave this country until you have dealt with these issues. Don't hop on the plane again to the United States. You've just met with President Biden, an incredibly important relationship, but you've just met with the President. The first responsibility for you, Prime Minister, is to be here and take care of the Australian public. Don't continue to abrogate your responsibilities. How can the government release 83 of the people who have criminal records, significant criminal records, and keep in detention 9 when they are all subject to the same finding from the High Court? How can that be the case? How can you not have legal capacity or legal capability to keep the 83 in, but you do to keep the 9 in? I mean, has this been explained by the Prime Minister? No, it has not, Mr Speaker. So the Prime Minister should not leave this country until the National Cabinet has been convened to provide assurances and support and comfort and safety to people of the Jewish community. That is the first priority for this Prime Minister, not to get on yet another plane and head overseas. Prime Minister, don't leave Canberra and don't leave this parliament until legislation has been passed which will give effect to providing safety to the Australian people, because what is happening is these people with significant criminal records, having committed significant rapes and assaults and murders against Australian citizens, are being released into the community, and you stand condemned.
Is the motion seconded? I'll give the call to for Wannon.
Yes, the motion is seconded. The number one priority of any government is to keep its citizens safe. Now, we asked today
three very simple questions of the Minister for Immigration. The first one was, can the minister advise the House whether any of the 81 hardcore criminals released in the community following the High Court's decision last week were released into the community without a visa? No answer. The second one we asked. The ABC has just reported that following the High Court decision, the government released some of the 80 hardened criminals, including murderers, rapists and child sex offenders, into the community without a visa. Is this true? The minister refused to answer. We then asked how many hardcore criminals released from detention got a letter from the Department of Home Affairs that said they were being released as an unlawful non-citizen. No answer. What the minister has confirmed is that at least 12 of those detainees were released into the community without visas, and that goes against the assurances he gave to the Australian public on the weekend. This is what he said on the weekend. Individuals who are required to be released as a result of the High Court's order will have appropriate visa conditions imposed on them in line with the need to protect the community. That did not happen. The ABC has reported, and you would not confirm it, you would not deny it, that people were released into the community without visas. Now, Minister, you said yesterday that you would stand up in this parliament, or you would tell the Australian people how many of those hardcore criminals were rapists, were child sex offenders, were murderers. You haven't provided that information
I'll just get
to the Australian public.
To direct his comments through the chair.
Thank you, Speaker. Minister, you said... Sorry. The minister said that he would provide that information. The minister said he would provide that information to the Australian people. He has not provided it. The Australian people do not know where these hardened criminals are. He has given no assurances whatsoever to the Australian public about what the conditions are on those visas. He has given no assurances to the Australian people as to what would happen if there's breaches of those visa conditions. None whatsoever. The number one priority of any government is to keep the Australian people safe. We have said on Monday that we would stand with the government to support legislation to keep the Australian community safe, to make sure that these detainees were locked up again. Yet what we've heard from most ministers in the government is reason after reason as to why they cannot legislate, and then we find out today that they are going to legislate. Well, when are you going to legislate? When are you going to legislate? Because all of us on this side are prepared to stay here tomorrow evening. We're prepared to stay here Friday, Saturday, Sunday to make sure that this legislation is put in place. We can't vote for a Prime Minister because there is no legislation. You said that there would be. You've said that there would be, but we've got no sign of that legislation. How can we vote for something that isn't in the parliament? We heard on Monday all the excuses and the reasons why that legislation couldn't be here in the parliament. Now, because you've been put under pressure to do your job, we are now going to see legislation brought before the parliament. Dragged kicking and screaming all the way to do it. Meanwhile, we read reports in the Western Australian newspaper that those detainees were out partying. Alcohol, drugs, going to and from the city while we're waiting for you to put this legislation into place. This is a government which is asleep at the wheel in keeping the Australian public safe. You have been caught out of having all the wrong priorities, not focusing on cost of living, not focusing on keeping the community safe, allowing these hardcore criminals to roam free, not doing your job.
The question is the motion be agreed to, and I give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, when people look for a definition of overreach, they will search for this motion that's moved by the Leader of the Opposition. There is no issue too big for him to show how small he is.
Will cease rejecting.
And the weaponisation or attempt to weaponise anti-Semitism in this chamber and make it a partisan issue is frankly beyond contempt. Frankly beyond contempt. I spoke in this chamber on Monday about the events in Caulfield and about the events in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. There was no qualification whatsoever in my condemnation. And I have spoken since to people including the Israeli ambassador, Gillian Siegel this morning, Moshe Khan, the rabbi from Balaclava in the electorate of McNamara, from that community, sent me a message of saying thank you for speaking out so clearly and so unequivocally. So to come in here and move this resolution and link anti-Semitism with the decision of the High Court is beyond contempt. Beyond contempt. This is the same political party
The member for Fairfax.
that tried to repeal Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act. And I stood with Peter Wertheim and other members of the Jewish community at that time. The Executive Council of the Australian Jewry said this: that would be the worst possible message to send at a time of increasing fear, insecurity and polarisation. It would be a serious abrogation of principled leadership by government, and indeed it was, which is why it was defeated. They failed to deliver the religious discrimination bill. They moved in here, and when an amendment was passed to carry anti-vilification provisions, they voted against it and trashed their own legislation before it was passed. I make no apologies for standing up against anti-Semitism, and I will do it unequivocally, as I have, as someone who led a campaign against a council in my own electorate, against the BDS campaign, I think 2 decades ago. I have a track record on this, and I'm proud of it. But I also have a track record of standing up for the rights and for justice of Palestinian people. And I make no apologies for being a consistent supporter of a two-state solution. And I make no apologies for trying to bring communities together, not divide them, because that's the role of political leaders. And at a time when there is social division, leaders have a choice. They have a choice to either bring people together or divide them, to either look for unity or look for opportunism. And what we have seen from this bloke here is consistent with his entire political career has been based upon division between people.
The member for Groom will cease rejecting.
Now, Jewish Australians are fearful at the moment.
Member O'Connor.
The sort of activity that is occurring is scaring them, and I stand with them. No one should threaten people because of their religion or their race in this country. But it is also the case that Arab Australians and Islamic Australians and women wearing hijabs in the streets of Sydney and Melbourne are being threatened, and I stand against that as well. The idea of selective human rights is one that I stand against. So I'm opposed to any innocent life being lost, whether it be as a result of the terrorism of Hamas in Israel, those dreadful occasions. Dreadful occasions.
The member for Barker will cease interjecting.
Innocent babies, I'm against being killed in Gaza. We have responsibilities as a democratic nation to say that democratic nations must stand up consistent with the international rule of law. And that is something that I have done and will consistently do. That's something that I will have meetings on in APEC at San Francisco. I stand up for Israel's right to defend itself. I've done that consistently. I also say how it does it matters. And I say that we need to care for all civilians.
Doesn't matter to you then, eh? It doesn't matter to
Order. We then have somehow a link between that issue and the issue of the High Court decision. A High Court decision that in the words of the Leader of the Opposition himself, he said this, having been responsible for these issues for 6 years. He went on 2GB yesterday and said, I'm not going to comment on individual cases because in some of those cases I will have been a decision maker. And in relation to that case, I believe that I was.
Order.
So if the matters go to court again, I don't want to interfere.
Order.
I'll take that process.
The member for Groom will cease
and he stood up here.
Members on my left.
He said that we
and the
should
member
have
for Bowman.
prevented people from being released, prevented a High Court decision. Having stood in here day after day, week after week, month after month and said, you've got to respect the Constitution. You can't change the Constitution because if you do, you can't out-legislate it. That's what he said. That's what they all said in Justified.
Order.
Their no vote. Day after day, week after week.
Order.
This is what he said in May in this chamber. The parliament cannot out-legislate the Constitution. But when it's convenient, we'll just chuck it out and pretend it doesn't exist. They were responsible for a decade. The legislation that's been thrown out by the High Court was coalition legislation.
Member for Bowman and Groom are now warned.
And then they say there's no responsibility. No responsibility.
Order.
The opportunism of the Leader of the Opposition has been exposed for all to see here today. But I didn't think that he could go this low as to link these two issues, to try to link these two issues. And then he tries to link it as well with just to get another crack in the tabloids or to get a hear from Sky After Dark. He tries to link it with, therefore, we should not be represented at APEC, which has been there for 30 years.
Order.
30 years where every Prime Minister,
Member for
since
Wannon.
APEC's creation as a Leaders' Summit
The member
by
for
Paul
Wannon
Keating
will cease
has been represented.
interjecting.
The only time that has not occurred is when Prime Minister Gillard had to return to Australia after a tragedy in her family, so she returned early. John Howard every time coalition Prime Ministers. But, you know, that's not okay. They do
Order.
that. Well, at the same time he leads a party who had a shadow ministry meeting almost over there in London, at their Talkfest. You know, Taylor, Morrison,
Order.
Price, Pike, Antich, Joyce, Patterson, Tehan, Webster, Canavan,
Order.
Hastie.
The Prime Minister will use the correct titles for members.
In an article titled "Tony Abbott and John Howard joined Jordan Peterson-led group looking at meaning of life," it was exposed that they were paid for
Order.
by foreign billionaire hedge fund managers. 12 of them.
Order.
12 of them. The fact is,
Members on my left
1
and
in
right.
4 of Australian jobs depends upon our trade. I make no apologies for re-engaging and fixing some of the problems that we were left. Fixing some of the problems, which is why we're dealing with supply chain issues, which is why we see trade and the impediments in China being removed, which is why I will meet with President Biden, President Xi, Prime Minister Trudeau, Prime Minister Kishida, and all the meetings that have been scheduled over one day. Now, the fact is The fact is that this motion has been brought forward because
Order.
this Leader
The
of
Prime
the
Minister's
Opposition
time
is
has-
incapable of saying
Order.
anything
The
positive.
Prime Minister's time has concluded. Order. Members on my right, time for this matter has expired. I'll put the question that the motion be agreed to. All of those opinion say aye. Aye. Against no. No. If the noes have it. Ayes have it. Division required. Ring the bells for 4 minutes. Lock the doors. The question is the motion moved by the Leader of the Opposition be agreed to. The ayes will pass to the right of the chair and the noes to the left. Appoint the honourable members for Grey and Parkes as tellers for the ayes and the honourable members for Werriwa and Bean as tellers of the noes. Order. The result of the division is ayes 54, noes 86. The matter was resolved in the negative. Just ask members to take their seats and return to their places as quickly and as quietly as possible. The call to the Prime Minister.
I ask further questions placed on the notice paper.
I'll just wait while members return to their seats. Members can leave the chamber or return to their seats as quickly and as quietly as possible. We shall move to the matter of public importance.